We all know motorcycles are dangerous, and your friends and family have likely made that abundantly clear. It's usually the first thing people say when you tell them you ride, right after they say, "Oh, wow, I didn't know you were gay." And sure, neither statement is entirely incorrect. In the United States alone, there have been tens of thousands of fatal motorcycle crashes in just the last decade. Every year, motorcyclists account for about 14% of all traffic fatalities, even though we only make up about 3% of registered vehicles. There's really no dancing around the fact that the risk is real. It kinda just makes sense, right? But here's the thing. When we talk about which motorcycles are the most deadly, the conversation usually goes to urban legends and bikes with mythic meme-worthy status. People throw around names like the Widowmaker, pointing to some infamous bike from the past. But what do you actually find when you go digging for hard numbers? Lucky for you, I put on my Hackerman hat for today's video. The truth is buried deep in the government crash data, hidden in coded files that most people will never take the time to find or open, or much less understand. So in today's video, we're doing something a little different. We went into the Fatality Analysis Reporting System run by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, aka the NHTSA, which is a subsidiary of the CIA, which is a subsidiary of Trump's weird tumor that's growing on the side of his neck. We pulled 13 years worth of data from 2010 through 2023, the most recent year available. We cracked open the codes, translated the cryptic government spreadsheets, and finally figured out what motorcycles are actually involved in most fatal crashes in America. And I promise you, the results don't look like anything that the myths you've been told. All right, before we jump into what the numbers actually show, let's talk about those infamous bikes of years past. If you're into motorcycling lore, you've probably heard of the Kawasaki H2 Mach 4. Back in 1972, Cycle World wrote, "The H2 is a menace on two wheels, a brutal machine that rewards fearlessness and punishes hesitation." That sounds like some cringe caption on a brand new Instagram post, doesn't it? It was a two-stroke triple that made about 74 ponies in an era where many bikes made 40 to 50. Look, you might think that's not a whole lot of power, but listen, braking and chassis tech hadn't caught up yet. People said, "It'll kill you if you don't respect it," and it was lovingly named the Widowmaker. Then, the Suzuki TL1000S from the late 90s. Even Sportrider magazine reported, the TL's rear suspension design is imaginative but unforgiving. There are sudden wobbles in certain situations that can catch even confident riders off guard. A reporter was sadly killed while testing one, which cemented its reputation among hobbyists and journalists as unreliable when pushed. The TL literally made a widow and thus was also named the Widowmaker. And of course, there is the wild world of early race replicas like the Suzuki RG500 Gamma, a street-legal GP-inspired two-stroke. Its square 4 engine was known among riders for frightening on-off power band feel, not to mention the risk of a full-blown engine seizure. Racers said you could be moaning down a straight, open it up, and hope the engine didn't lock up on you. It was made for those who were willing to take insane risks for race-bred performance, a far cry from how easy they are to ride nowadays. These bikes are all legendary, and they absolutely earned reputations as being incredibly dangerous, but here's the thing, they were kinda rare. Very few of them were sold in huge numbers. The H2 Mach 4 didn't rack up massive yearly sales. The TL1000S had a relatively limited production run, and the RG500 was exotic and outside the realm of civilian riders. So yeah, there may have been some higher rates of accidents per bike sold, but when you zoom out and look at the entire rider population, these Widowmakers are kind of a drop in the ocean compared to the bikes that most Americans actually bought and rode, and unfortunately for many, were killed by. That's why we wanted to figure this out for real, not myths or forum posts, not secondhand stories, just cold hard data, baby. This video was made with the help of FARS, the Fatality Analysis Reporting System. It's a federal database that tracks every fatal vehicle crash in the US since the 1970s. Each year it publishes .csv files. These files contain entries for each crash. Was it fatal? What kind of vehicle was involved? And what make, what model, and what motorcycle, and even what displacement? The challenge is that the data is not easy to make sense of. Nothing is clearly labeled or easily sorted through. So, we decided to dig deep and figure it out. Why? Because dissecting government files to learn something about our sport feels way more important than reviewing helmets or shilling for e-bikes. That's why. We assembled data from every FARS crash file from 2010 to 2023, identified which incidents were fatal, and then collected all the vehicles in those fatal crashes. So, here's what happened once we exported and decoded everything. When we sorted all the data and compiled fatal crashes by vehicle category, the single top entry turned out to be Make 72, Model 706. Fatal crashes, 17,377. We turned to the manual and discovered that Make 72 is Harley-Davidson, and Model 706 equals 750cc and over displacement category, which is a lot of Harley-Davidsons. Therefore, the motorcycle category with the most recorded fatal crashes between 2010 and 2023 in the US is Harley-Davidson with machines 750cc or above, with 17,377 fatal crashes in that period. We found the codes for every major motorcycle manufacturer as well, corresponding displacement category. For example, Honda was code 37, Suzuki is code 53, Yamaha is 76, and so on and so forth. The displacement codes are the same for every manufacturer. So for example, code 706 means it's 750cc and over. 705 means it's 450 to 749, and etc. So when you see Suzuki Model 705, that means Suzuki bikes in the 450 to 749cc range. When you see Harley Model 706, that's the big cruisers and touring machines. We had to do some deductive reasoning to find the answers we were looking for. But once we started looking at the data, the writing was on the wall. Okay, let me take a break really quick and tell you about a secret weapon I use on my bike, and that is Rockform. I've been using products from them for many years now, and you'll always find one of their mounts on my bikes. Right when I think a Rockform handlebar mount can't get any better, they went and dropped their new wireless charging head. This little guy fits onto any existing Rockform handlebar mount, and when plumbed into USB power, it'll wirelessly charge your phone anytime it's mounted onto your handlebar. It's pretty sweet. It means no more arriving at your destination with 5% battery or fumbling around with extra cords every time you get on or off your bike. I've been using it, and honestly, it's a game changer. Whether you're commuting or heading out on a weekend canyon run, your phone stays powered, protected, and perfectly positioned. Rockform has always been a longtime supporter of Yami Noob, and we are very grateful for that. So if you like what we do and need to upgrade your mount or jump on the bandwagon for the first time, hit the link in the description and use the code YN25 for 25% off your order from Rockform. Thanks again to Rockform for sponsoring today's video. Now let's get back into it. So what do we learn when we map these categories? The most fatal subsect of motorcycles since 2010 has been Harley-Davidson's 750cc and up, totaling 17,377 crashes. That pretty much includes every Harley, since they don't make much of anything under 750cc's. But there are some assumptions we can make that tell a greater story. First of all, they sell in large numbers every year, thousands of units. Since many of these big touring bikes are owned by retirees, riders tend to put a lot of miles on them. When you multiply exposure by risk factors like age, helmet usage, riding style, and other factors, those fatal crash numbers tend to climb fast. The NHTSA reports say that riders over 50 have a higher crash fatality rate per mile. Harley-Davidson are more commonly owned by older riders who might be complacent in their ability as a rider with decades of bad habits. Combine that with often lower helmet usage in certain states, like Florida and unfortunately here in Texas, you have higher fatal numbers. Beyond Harley-Davidson's podium position in the dataset, the big four, Honda, Suzuki, Yamaha, and Kawasaki, all show up heavily in the 706 displacement category. For instance, Of Japanese motorcycles over 750cc, Honda has had 4,155 fatalities since 2010. You know what they say? Hondas aren't safe. If you don't get that joke, then you should probably join the Yamanoob Discord server, and then you might understand. In the same category, Suzukis have been involved in 3,359 fatal accidents, and there have been 2,928 on Yamahas and 2,197 on Kawasaki's. These are likely your 1,000cc and up sport bikes, if I were to guess. CBR 1000 RRs, R1s, Gixxer 1000s, Hayabusas, etc. They have high speed, high power, and often are ridden by younger and more risk-accepting riders. And if 1000cc sport bikes have the most fatalities, does anybody have a guess on what is next? Anybody? Bueller? 450 to 749cc, which I can only assume most specifically includes 600cc super sports. This is the bracket where you see bikes like the CBR 600 RR, ZX6, Gixxer 600, and even the Gixxer 750 falling to this category as the only 749cc. These bikes are deemed by squids to be safer than a leader bike, but they're still really fast for the street and often owned by younger riders who are more accepting of risk. And data from the NHTSA very clearly shows that the correlation between age and fatal crashes is a parabola. Younger riders and older riders are most at risk for fatal motorcycle accidents, but it's also worth noting that in 2021, 36% of all fatal crashes, the rider didn't even have a proper motorcycle endorsement. Sport bikes and a lack of proper training, that combination just doesn't end well. The biggest offender in this category is Honda with 2,700 fatalities, Suzuki with about 2,600, and Yamaha with 2,295. So yeah, these middleweight sport bikes are not immune. They kill, but they kill less often than the big ones when you look at it in absolute numbers. And it kind of makes sense because Honda sells a ton of bikes. They've got to be number 2 after Harley-Davidson here in America. So lower displacement bikes, the category is coded 701 to 704, with the amount of fatal crashes starts to drop dramatically. Beginner bikes, scooter bikes, tame commuter machines, they show up far less often in the crash totals. They simply don't carry the same speed potential. Riders aren't typically pushing them to high horsepower, high speeds. Exposure is often lower, and the riding is usually cautious and more practical. Here's our findings for the most fatal bikes, line by line. Harley-Davidson 750cc and up, 17,377 fatal crashes. Honda 750cc and up, 4,155 fatal crashes. Suzuki 750cc's and up, 3,359 fatal crashes. Yamaha 750cc's and up, 2,928 fatal crashes. Honda 450 to 749cc was 2,703 fatal crashes. Suzuki with 450 to 749cc's was 2,682 fatal crashes. Yamaha with the 450 to 749cc was 2,295 fatal crashes. Kawasaki in the 750cc plus category was 2,197 fatal crashes. Kawasaki 450 to 749cc's was 1,823 fatal crashes. And for each line, we have a suspected bike profile. When you see Harley-Davidson 750cc's and up, think big touring cruisers, often ridden by older folks, bike nights where they drink a lot of alcohol and then ride without a helmet at night. And just saying it like it is. Look at the statistics from Sturgis every year if you don't believe me that is causing the crashes and the accidents and the deaths. So, what's the big picture? It's not these one-off experimental bikes that everybody loves to mythologize or use as scapegoats, or hell, even a Janus, something like that. They don't show up as the deadliest by raw numbers. Rare bikes with scary reputations matter in legend, but they don't move the national dial. It's mass-sold, high-displacement machines, sport bikes and big cruisers ridden by older guys that dominate the fatal crash counts. Because of exposure, because of riding conditions, because of the combination of powerful engines and riders who may not have the skill to back up the power. There's a reason Harley and Honda have the most attributed fatalities. They sell the most bikes. Rider demographics matter a lot. Older riders riding Harleys, often in relaxed, complacent style, sometimes in states with weaker helmet laws, sometimes with alcohol involvement, sometimes with Deb on the back. God forbid there's some Clibbins out there. Meanwhile, sport bike riders are often younger, sometimes pushing too hard on the street and end up far more likely to be in incidents with catastrophic outcomes. Although some sport bikes or two-stroke legends have high fatality rates per unit sold, their absolute numbers are pretty low. The bikes you see every day are the ones killing most people in sheer count. No beginner bikes really made their way into the data, and for large displacement categories, it is fair to assume we're not talking about sport touring bikes or adventure bikes leading. The danger seems strongly correlated with displacement, power, and exposure more than exotic design or deadly reputation. So there you have it, boys. We went balls deep into the government crash data, decoded the manuals, and pulled out what really kills motorcyclists in America. The stories about Widowmakers are gripping. They make great YouTube videos or forum posts, but they don't really tell the whole story. The truth is much simpler and scarier in a way. Motorcycles, in general, are dangerous. The more bikes a manufacturer sells, the more their bikes kill, because that's just how it works. But within that data, big bikes, powerful bikes, bikes that are ridden hard, bikes that are ridden by people who may be inexperienced or underprepared, are the ones that are going to do the most damage. So really, it tells you one thing. If you ride, know your limits. Wear your helmet, be smart, be patient, because the most dangerous motorcycles aren't obscurities lost to time. They're in your garage right now at this very moment. So, what can we do? Well, like we always say here on the channel, wear a helmet, ride during the day, pick a bike that's appropriate for street use, have a lot of training, and ride within your limits. You're going to be way better off than in all these unfortunate souls who perished riding their large Harley Davidsons. Thanks for making it all the way to the end. I always appreciate it. Thanks so much for watching today's show. I'll see you on the next one. Fact: the first oranges were from Southeast Asia, and they were actually green. Goodbye.